Nadine, you have written about how censorship can intensify bigotry rather than suppressing it. More laws, more litigation, more tension. With this in mind, how can we shift public concern away from legislation and onto civil discourse?
What is the best way to change how people think about each other and about the world? It is through the process that we're engaged in now, which is education and information. And so I think it's really poetic that the most famous and most influential Supreme Court opinion that first talked about opposing censorship for ideas that are viewed as hateful or evil or dangerous or perhaps leading to violence isn't suppression, but more speech. And this was a great opinion by the first Jewish justice on the Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis, who said the answer to evil counsels is good ones.
So as students studying civics at the ISC, American history plays a huge part in our studies. How does history inform your engagement with your field and civics as a whole?
Oh, thank you so much, Ava. I am interviewed constantly. I answer tens of thousands of questions a year. And I don't think anybody has ever asked me that question before. So congratulations to you for coming up with an original question. And you will see me think on my feet or on my seat, quite literally. But as I indicated in my answer to Alex's excellent question, I always take what I know about history into account in trying to formulate the most effective policy positions on current issues. There's a famous saying, I can't remember who originally said it, maybe one of you will, that those of us who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. And I find in my experience that so many people tend to have what I call historical hubris. They think, oh, this is the absolute first time that this has ever happened, or happened this way, or it's absolutely worse than anything that's ever come before. And so they don't have what I urge instead, which is historical humility, that maybe this is not the first time this has happened. Maybe we should draw lessons from history. And if I can give a very specific example, which has already come up in the excellent discussions today, social media as the new media kid on the block is constantly being attacked as if it's completely unique. And this is the first time that any medium in history has been able to do so much damage in terms of disinformation and misinformation, hate speech, and maybe some of the old media had problems that came out a little bit today too with cable news, but never at the scale. And so therefore we need absolutely new regulatory approaches. And I just have to laugh, because the more you know about the history of media, you can go back to the printing press and you see exactly the same complaints and almost exactly the same language. And so did licensing of the printing press, did the massive censorship of that do anything to improve discourse, or did it in fact have a counterproductive impact? So to that extent, I'm consciously aware of history, but also aware that, as is true for the present, there are many different perspectives. There's no one single correct interpretation of the very complex facts and events that took place in the past. And it's maybe even harder to figure out what the accurate interpretation is, because it's so long ago, we might not have complete records. So I think we have to have a humility as we interpret history, just as we have a humility that our present moment is not unique.
Engaging in civil discourse can be a daunting task, with any one discussion seeming inconsequential in an increasingly polarized nation. With so many asking, what difference will it make? How can we encourage counterspeech from the individual level?
I actually find civil discourse to be quite easy. Maybe it's because that's what I do, or strive for. My entire career is basically engaged in education and advocacy, and that at its essence is a form of discourse, either one-on-one or one with a group. And I have been doing it for so many years that maybe it's just become a habit or a skill. But I get so much pleasure as well as information and understanding through the process of discourse with people whose views are different from mine. It's harder to learn from somebody who's just repeating what you already think, right? So if you want to broaden your horizons, you see it as an opportunity and a pleasure, an opportunity to learn more, to learn, at the very least, you're learning more about the other person, but that person may well help shed light on yourself and your own ideas and the world as a whole. And I like the way the word dialogue and the word discourse, those two words have become more and more common, and the way I understand it is different from debate or even from discussion, which used to be the major modes of exchanging ideas, because I think it connotes more of a challenge. So maybe it's more purpose-driven than a discussion, but it's less of a competition and winner take all than a debate. It's a mutually beneficial exchange of ideas that will enrich both of us as individuals and have spillover positive impacts for our community and our society.
The free marketplace of ideas and debate is a concept that comes up a lot in free speech advocacy, often relating to academic institutions. What is the state of this marketplace today, and how might we invigorate it?
The free marketplace of ideas is a metaphor that comes from a famous Supreme Court opinion by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was making a similar point to the point that Justice Brandeis made that I referred to earlier, and the two of them agreed with each other. They signed on to each other's minority opinions, minority in the early 20th century, which were embraced unanimously by the current Supreme Court. So Holmes said that he started by saying, men realize, and he did say men, but I think he meant people, but men come to realize that when time has proven the falsity of even the ideas that they most deeply cherish, that the better test for truth is the view of the marketplace. And I'm paraphrasing it, but he was basically saying, if you really want to come as close as we flawed human beings can come to approximating truth, it's better to listen to other perspectives, to allow discourse, and yes, even debate and dialogue in this marketplace. And he went on to say, basically and here's an exact quote from that passage. He said, "It is an experiment, as all life is an experiment, but as long as our Constitution is in place, it is where we have put our faith." And I think that's really important, because a lot of people mischaracterize that opinion as saying, well, Holmes was so naive. He thought that the marketplace of ideas was guaranteed to produce truth. No, he was a real skeptic, and he understood the limitations of any individual human being, let alone the entire society, that we all have our blind spots and our limitations. But he was saying it is less bad to allow everybody to have their say and everybody to discuss with each other. And that's really the scientific method, right? Every single idea, hypothesis is put out there for everybody to question and test and challenge, and maybe step by step, that's much more likely to bring us toward truth in any sphere, whether it be religion or philosophy, social science, natural science. It's not perfect, but it's much less imperfect than having a centralized sensorial gatekeeper saying, this idea is approved and this one is not approved.
You have pointed out how pushes for censorship often stem from the fears of society, citing anti-communist hysteria alongside fears about the proliferation of racism and sexism. It's true that it's often healthier to confront a fear than to avoid it. So what forms of speech can help us confront these anxieties?
What forums or what forms?
Forums.
Forums. I would say any forum, Alex, any opportunity to understand not only your own anxieties and fears, but those of other people. And in particular, as I already alluded to, I think if you are engaged with somebody who has a different perspective, it is more likely to help you shed light on what might be limitations in your own thought. You use the word anxiety. That certainly has mental health implications, and even fears, if it's an irrational fear or a fear that's so overwhelming it makes it hard for you to function. So, one kind of forum would be with a counselor or, mental health expert. And I think it's not a coincidence that the major form of therapy is through dialogue, right? A skilled therapist who will ask questions, much like in a law school where I teach. The mode of teaching is through Socratic dialogue, where the professor asks questions. So any kind of forum that asks questions of you and challenges you without inhibitions, to dig deep, to understand as best you can your own motivations, and to sometimes once you can put those in perspective, you will understand that what you're afraid of isn't really so terrifying, or that there are steps that you can take to reduce the danger.